Anna?
Same message.
Angela.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us as we kick off this exciting series in conjunction with ZAR X and Desicatio. And of course, we're going to be talking to a whole host of CEOs in the next few weeks, getting to know them better. And I think we're going to have Renogen the following week, and we'll speak to the Purple Group. But to kick us off this morning, a very interesting business, very interesting individual who I was pleasantly surprised to know that he speaks fluent German, and he did say some very interesting words as well. So hopefully in this conversation, we might get him to speak a little German with us. But I'd like to introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, to Franz Gmeiner, who is the CEO and founder of Orion Real Estate. Franz, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning and grüß Gott, all participants. Thank you, Nastassia, and Mark, thank you for arranging this webinar. It is certainly my privilege and pleasure to participate this morning and to discuss what we at Orion have been doing for certainly close on 30 years. And of course, we can discuss the various aspects and perhaps here and in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how we've managed to survive up to now, and how we are planning to survive and thrive post-COVID. I'm sure we all have learned some good and perhaps not so good lessons from this COVID things, and I'm sure over a tipple or two, one can discuss whether it was a good or a bad thing, this lockdown. It certainly has hurt us as well, like it has virtually all businesses, but we do have plans in place to take it forward.
It's a whole new world, Franz. I mean, you know, a few months ago, you and I would probably be in a conference facility in a room, you know, sitting across from each other with many of our participants sitting as audience members. And now we have to have this conversation virtually. And I understand as well, you had your ZAR X listing virtually as well. How was that?
Well, I'm certainly very proud of that, and I must thank the people at ZAR X and their technical people to do a virtual listing, and even ringing of an actual bell virtually was quite exciting. So certainly I was very proud of being part of that, doing the virtual thing. I think it was 23rd of April, and right in the middle of the lockdown. And yeah, it was certainly a Chinese term, an auspicious occasion for us. And we have been back at the office for some time now, and it's other than dealing with cash flow issues, it's pretty much business as usual with our property investment and the facilities management.
One of the great things about sessions like this is that, you know, investors and potential investors get to know the team behind the companies that they like. And the one thing, you know, we're going to talk about is how you got into the property industry. But I remember someone mentioning to me that you bought your first building back in the early 90s on the corner of Elof Street. And yeah, when I look at downtown Joburg now, it's a whole new different world. Talk to me about the property space back then in the early 90s and why that particular building when your friends thought you were crazy.
Nastassia, that is an absolutely fantastic question. It really takes me back all those years to 1991. And it was just as I got married as well, typically bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. And as a child and as a family, we used to play Monopoly. And for those of you who've played Monopoly, you know there's all different squares and blocks. And the purple square back in the day, which was, the purple square indicates the valuable properties. And one of the purple squares was in fact Elof Street. And I don't know how it got stuck in my mind, but many years later, I bought a property on the corner of Elof Street and Marshall Street. What I forgot to understand at that time is that Elof and Marshall was already on a banana peel from a real estate point of view. The fancy retailers of Elof Street had by then already left the precinct. Some of my mates were saying to me, Franz, you must be crazy investing in that part of town. Although Marshalltown was still there, the mining houses were there, and it was the last throes of the Carlton Hotel. We used to have some memorable lunches and dinners at the Carlton Hotel, for those of you who remember those days. And there we were. And the reason why I got into that investment, because at that time, I was still a budding accountant in charge of an auditing firm. And we did what auditors do. We did the ticking and vouching. In those days, still green ink and whatnot. These days, I'm sure it's all electronic. But in fairness to everyone, and also in some ways, my good luck, is that single building was the beginning of what is today Orion Real Estate. And certainly, if I can give us a particular incident there, one talks about learning the hard way or learning in the trenches. It was a high-rise building, and high-rise buildings have their own challenges. And somewhere along the way, a water pipe burst and causing a major flood all the way from first floor down into the basement. And when I arrived the next morning, of course, the basement was an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and the lift was scooping up water and all those crises. And I was running around like a chicken trying to figure out what to do next. Long story short, we survived that, and we've survived a number of crises over the years. So that's really taught us how to deal with crises, and therefore COVID in some way. We've had a couple of practice runs on stuff similar to COVID over the years.
So that was your foray into property. I mean, what happened next? How did you then make the decision to expand into other, properties now that you've got the Elof Street one?
It was really almost some kind of a trial and error. The first building was half vacant when I took it over, or took it on, not knowing anything about how to run a property business. But with a bit of effort and running around and phoning friends, we managed to fill it up. And all of a sudden I realized, but hang on, this can be a good business. And of course, one led to the next. I think my second building was a block of flats in Primrose on the East Rand. And then one of my long property colleagues, Trevor Hosiowski, sold me a scrappy little building called Mayer's Corner, also in Primrose on the East Rand. And interestingly, to this day, we actually still own Mayer's Corner, which was built in 1931 on the East Rand. It's had really good tenants over the years. Post office has been there for many years, and occasionally they pay their rent and so forth. So yeah, one led to the next, and then of course sometimes one in the year 2000, just straight after 1998, which was a major financial crisis back in the day in South Africa. Some will remember that at that time, 1998, interest rates went to 25.5%. And of course, myself at that time being highly leveraged with high gearing in relation to the values of the properties, I was basically financially underwater and had to fight my way through that survival. Straight after 1998, we were offered properties and portfolios of properties all over South Africa. And in a good way, and I'm forever grateful for that, the banks were throwing money at us. So in the year 2000, in 1 year, I bought around 100 million rands worth of properties. And I say this tongue in cheek and maybe a little bit proud as well, with 100% gearing. I didn't have a ZAC to scratch anything. I didn't have any money, but some of the banks gave me all the money to invest in these properties. And over the years, most of them proven to be good investments. And that's how these things grew. Basically, if I can put it in a short term, it's organic growth, one by one, or a small portfolio by small portfolio. Of course, then 2005 happened when we went onto the JSE through a reverse listing. And that reverse listing was also kind of almost an accidental kind of happening. A property broker at the time prior to that, about a year or so prior to that, came to me and offered me a share in this company named Alpina Investments. And my response to him was very simple. I said, I'm quite keen to get involved on condition that I get a controlling interest in this company. Long story short, sometime later, putting our portfolio into this Alpina, we ended up with a 94% interest in the company. And of course, at the time also, we renamed Alpina to Orion Real Estate, what it is today. And then we had a 15-year run at the JSE. And of course, at the JSE towards the end, I can write also a small chapter in my memoirs about the JSE experience. But we left the JSE. And all I can also say about the JSE experience, we left our our head our head held high, because we were at one point suspended, then unsuspended. So we left the JSE not under a cloud or anything like this. We left, but we wanted to be listed on an exchange, and the reason for that is number one, to be able to be afforded the REIT status, real estate investment trust status, and there are a number of advantages being a REIT, but a very large advantage for ourselves is not having to pay capital gains tax. REITs are exempt from capital gains tax, and in our business, in the property business, as and when a property is disposed of after having invested in a property, particularly if it has been improved or times have changed for the better, there's usually capital appreciation. Many people, I'm sure, will know it personally. You buy a house for a certain amount of money, and some years later, it's worth a lot more. Well, in commercial property, the same formula plays out, just on a larger scale. When the time comes that you sell this property, SARS, of course, want to collect the capital gains tax. And capital gains tax these days is 22.5% of the capital gain. When we were delisted, the capital gains provision was almost 100 Rand in our little balance sheet, because we are a small company. So saving 100 Rand potential capital gains tax certainly makes it worth our trouble to be on ZAR X. And I could certainly advocate that other like-minded property companies, our size or larger, if they're currently family-owned property firms, I would certainly advise going to an exchange like ZAR X. So the first one is capital gain. But secondly, we also need to grow. Our portfolio at 630 million is way too small to have really critical mass. And that's the truth of it. We need to get to 2 billion of investment value in the shortest possible time. And a part of that strategy would be to acquire properties by a combination of cash and shares. Also at dilution, our family have a certain strategy, and the strategy is to dilute our holdings to ultimately below 50%, but never less than 26%. So it becomes a bit of succession planning. I'm still a young 62, but when the time comes to retire at 95 or something, maybe a little bit earlier, there should be a second generation of managers to come through, and they need to be incentivized via share options, via decent bonus structures, to run the company professionally with good corporate governance, and while I can enjoy the fruits of my labor collecting my dividend checks. That's the other advantage with a REIT. A REIT, by legislation, have to declare at least 75% of their taxable income by way of dividends. And that then becomes almost, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but it becomes a much more assurance, a much larger certainty for the investor that he can look forward to two components in his investment. One is the capital growth in the value of his shares, and secondly, the dividend. Of course, talking about value, I'm sure most people do follow the stock market and how that's happened. The property sector, in particular REITs, have been decimated on the stock markets, locally and abroad. Some property companies might see the end of life. But I think most property companies will recover and will do well. Particularly in South Africa, there's some really, really smart CEOs in the property sector. I won't mention their names. I know a couple of those guys, and I can tell you they are seasoned campaigners. Those guys are super smart, and they know how to run properties. So therefore, I'm happy and very fortunate to work in an industry where there's some very smart guys around. They're competing with us on a small, we're small, they're large companies. There's some good guys out there.
Let's hone in a little bit more on this industry. I mean, you've been playing in it since 1991, as you mentioned earlier. It's the year 2020. Perhaps you can give us some color as to how you've seen this industry develop over the years for those who may be new, specifically from an investment point of view, if you don't know what has been happening over the last few years.
Of course, we've all seen, or many have seen the .com, which became .bomb. We've seen the advent of the web, World Wide Web. We've seen online trading, online commerce. Many, if not most people these days, buy some goods online, have it delivered to their home. With telecommunication, now we've seen also with the COVID and the lockdown, how one can work remotely. And right now we're doing a conference virtually. All these things I've just mentioned have a significant impact on property. And we need to take cognizance of that. So the property space will change. How people purchase things will change. How people will live will change, and how people will work in offices will change. However, on the one hand, many things change. On the other hand, many things will remain the same. And we can test this notion. Despite all the, call it, virtual happenings, when I want to make myself a fried egg for breakfast, the truth is something called a chicken somewhere has to do something to produce that egg. That hasn't changed. How the chicken gets fed and how the egg eventually gets delivered to my doorstep, that's changed. So we also haven't learned how to sleep upright. We sleep horizontally in a thing called a bed. And when I said I use kind of almost facetious examples to use that. So I'm saying property is here to stay. When somebody makes a widget of sorts, or some device, widget, manufacturing, assembly, that needs a space with a roof over it. And that's typically called a factory. As much as people want to work from home, we discovered in our own organization, humans are herd animals. So, sticking them down into a dark hole somewhere and hoping to somehow survive isn't really good for social interaction, certainly is not good for team spirit, and certainly is not good for staff morale. So getting together, working together as a team, and all team sports shows that is the way. So will offices disappear? No, they won't disappear. Will they become small in terms of total footprint per company? I'm sure. Will people look for more affordable options? Absolutely. So I've just not dealt with, let's say, manufacturing. That will remain. Producing fuel or petrochemical stuff. Guess what? There's still some kind of a tank or a pipe that needs to do that. Again, that's property. An aircraft needs to hang out in some kind of an aircraft hangar. That's also property. So the property industry will remain industrial. In terms of offices, yes, it will remain. Retail, absolutely. Many retailers are learning fast to adapt to the new style. They will do the real-time display of their goods, and maybe fitting on a jacket or trousers or whatever it is in the fitting room. Also becomes a depot for the return of goods and for the collection of goods. Many people in South Africa particularly don't really have a formal address where you can take a delivery, particularly, let's say, for informal settlements and other places. Those people who want to go online need to have a place where they can collect their goods. Of course, things like restaurants and coffee shops, when they open again, we're social people. We want to hang out, have a cup of coffee, eat a pizza, stuff like this. Again, one needs premises for that. The fellow who does your tire fitment on your motor car or services your motor car, people who do, let's say, the health and beauty, the spas, the nail bars, the facials, the dentist, all these people need premises. So in short, what I'm saying is premises or spaces are here to stay, I beg your pardon. How we use the premises, that'll change, and we have to be more innovative, more crafty, more open-minded, more thinking outside the box, how we can marry this big thing online, which will not disappear. It will, if anything, it will grow with the physical property, which is the old school, old style bricks and mortar.
Right. You were talking about the size of the portfolio and the aspiration to grow even further. Perhaps you can take us into your confidence here. When you guys make decisions about the property that you want to acquire and these decisions over the years, what informs that? Like, how do you make the decision, like, this is the property we're going to buy, or this is what we're going to let go of? What's that process like?
Nastassia, the last part of your question is what do you let go of is a very, very interesting question. In fact, it's more important than the question that about when do you buy. Many years ago, when I first interviewed our then to be chairman of our exco back in the day. We're going back 15 years. And this person was also a seasoned campaigner, knowing his way around the listed property or listed environment, not properties, having been associated with some of the largest organizations in South Africa, with a PhD in business administration. So one of the, after shaking my hands and asking me how I am, one of the first questions he asked me is, Franz, what is the sell-by date of your properties? Now, you could have knocked me over. I almost fell off my chair. I'm thinking, really, how can this person ask me such a ridiculous, stupid question? How can a property have a sell-by date? This is not a can of tin food or something, or something that expires. How can a property expire? And in fact, I must confess, I took it quite hard. It was difficult to take this one, and it took me months, if not years, to digest that actual question. The truth is, a property does have a sell-by date, and we can test the notion. In areas, they're called demographic spread. One also finds urban decay and urban development. Back in the day, we spoke earlier about my monopoly board Blue Square, Elof Street. It was the prime address in South Africa. Guess what? It no longer is. Sandton was what they used to call mink and manure, meaning the horses were doing their thing on the lawn because it was just small holdings and homesteads. Well, today, Sandton is the most expensive real estate in Africa. And so we can use many examples of areas that come and go. And in a bizarre fashion, some areas have staying power, like our really downtrodden, low income, having shifted demographically quite substantially, our Primrose area. It's not pretty by any means of the imagination. It's not pretty. But guess what? We have a Pep Stores there that has expanded twice. And then people are now with COVID are standing outside in queues wanting to get into the doors. We've had an absolute for many years. Pep Stores have another brand. Ackermans opened a branch there about 2 years ago, also trading very, very well. So guess what? This downtrodden area called Primrose, in fact, does have customers. The style and the racial classification of the customers have changed, but you know what? Ultimately, the money in the pocket is the same color for everybody. And those customers are there to stay. If anything, that area is densifying, meaning more people per square kilometer, meaning more customers. And maybe their spending habits are different. Their preference of food might be different, and as long as I provide their needs. So therefore, the answer is when you sell, sometimes when something's on, let's call it the last legs. I mentioned earlier hotel properties. Hotel properties are difficult. Would we like to sell the remaining 2 hotels in the portfolio? The answer is yes, we'd like to sell them if we can find a customer for those. Would we like to buy more hotels? The answer is no. So that takes me to what is an investment criteria. For us, it's because we're a multi-focused property fund, meaning we have different categories, offices, retail, industrial, and hospitality, which stood us in good stead in the difficult times. We're not focused on one only. We're not a specialist fund. And the spread, it certainly has worked for us, is to identify properties in an area where we believe there's still some substance in terms of buying power or usability. So it's important to choose an area that has some kind of substance, and I'll get to substance back in a minute. And then we do I do what we call a desktop. Simply look at the numbers, straightforward little spreadsheet, projected income minus expected expenses, and that has to provide a return or a yield, a return on investment. And if that return on investment meets our investment criteria, we then take the process forward by making offers and then going to due diligence process. So as much as not that scientific, it does have an underlying assessment of the area, and within the area, does that particular property hold its own? But again, it's not cast in stone. As an example, we own 2 properties in the Cape Town townships, Delft and West Bank. Now, for anybody who's been to Delft in the Western Cape, you'll know that puts a new spin on the term rough and tumble. If you want to see what something that looks rough looks like, you don't have to go to Lagos in Nigeria. I promise you, just go to Delft and you've seen it all. That area is rough. It also is, I'm told, the murder rate capital of South Africa, which probably makes it the murder rate capital of the world. But guess what? We have in that area a little U-Save supermarket, which we recently refurbished and opened. It was previously, years ago, a Pick n Pay Score supermarket, was derelict and abandoned and vandalized. We rekitted this thing, and today this thing is a beautiful supermarket, trading off the hook, serving the local community. So they have a better shopping experience. I'm sure Shoprite are very happy with their tenancy there, and we as landlords are very happy to collect the rent on that property. So what I'm saying, in other words, a property doesn't have to necessarily be in the prime address, the best address. I mentioned earlier that Sandton is the premier, the blue chip area precinct in Africa. What's not well known is that in Sandton there's 2.2 million square meters of vacant office space and counting. I think it's going to get worse. So as much as there's glitz and glamour, beautiful hotels, beautiful, I mean, state-of-the-art, world-class office buildings. Some of those new ones, your Sasol headquarters and your Discovery headquarters. I mean, those things are, I mean, pieces of art. I mean, they're engineering and design, blue chip stuff. They're there. But right adjacent, there's another nondescript office building that's standing vacant, and who knows who will occupy that. So the trick here is understanding your business, in our case it's property, and using a combination of this, call it street smarts, that knowledge built over many years, together with the numbers. The numbers ultimately are the final answer. If the numbers don't add up, you cannot invest in the property.
My next question is actually perfect, because it leads us nicely into a segue where we're going to focus on what Orion is good at. But before I get to that, a lot of business leaders that you may interact with on a professional basis as well will tell you about the lessons they learned or the mistakes they've made with certain investments. And the thing with failure and some of these lessons that you learn is that they build character. And when you share those stories, there's always someone who's listening in the audience who feels, oh, you know, I've been in a similar situation, or geez, that's something I could bear in mind when I make my next investment decision. Is there one that comes to you that basically made you re-look at your perspective on property, like the one lesson you learned over the years that basically made you refocus everything? What's that?
The big one is cash is king. That to invest in a property that doesn't have immediate or very short-term cash flow prospects, stay away. I.e., do not buy a vacant piece of land that you're thinking you're going to turn it into something valuable, or hoping another person might buy it off you at a big profit. All those things have happened. Sandton was a piece of felt back in the day, now it's valuable. And so was Midrand. However, if you're buying that piece of land, hoping to turn a profit tomorrow, you may have to wait 30 or 40 or maybe 100 years. You will not outlive that situation. So if you at all are wanting to get into, let's call the property investment stroke rental market, there are lots of books about rent, buy to let, and how to make money in real estate, and how you become a multimillionaire and all that. And the truth is, many millions have been created, many millionaires and billionaires have been created in the property industry. But there have also been many casualties. And I'll have to admit is that I and Orion, we've been almost a casualty a few times. We have stared that proverbial lion in the face, or whatever, or the monster in the eyes. There were a few times when it was touch and go for our company's survival. And the learning from this is, number one, cash is king. So therefore, if one has a property that doesn't produce enough adequate income, try and get rid of that as fast as possible, alternatively don't buy in the first place. But another one is the day-to-day management. And there also we've made some massive mistakes over the years. And as it happens, ultimately I'm responsible. So whatever mistakes staff or personnel have made, they've made those mistakes on my behalf, so therefore I made the mistake. And the mistakes were, if you don't look after your tenants and service them properly, how it is intended, ultimately the tenant will vote with his feet. He will leave and find himself greener pastures. That's key. Sometimes we forgot that. Also, this thing called utilities, or what they call the municipal bills, your electricity, water, rates, taxes, sewage. Now, those things have become little monsters by themselves because the councils, in desperate need for their cash flow, are focusing on the business community and business properties to somehow levy some charges that may not be correct. And funding a call center or an inquiries desk isn't going to help. I promise you, we've done all that. We've done an inquiries desk and the call center and logging a query. That goes into a dog hole going nowhere. To manage that for a portfolio, that in itself is a full-time job. So make sure that your utility billing and collections are in line. Other costs, we at one stage with having this idea of this big organization, our own in-house bureaucracy became bloated. And it was one manager who needs another assistant and so forth and so forth. And the assistant might need even somebody to help them. And by the end of it, you have this headquarters that looks pretty on a group photograph, but it certainly is not pretty when it comes to financial results. So certainly we learned there also to trim that, to do more with less, to make do. Also to identify, audit and check our service providers. As a simple example, air conditioners need servicing. But if you don't have a reliable, trustworthy, value for money service provider, and if he knows that you don't know, he may just dust down the air conditioning compressor and bill you for a new compressor because he says the old one was no good, and so forth. So now that kind of street smarts, which a typical property textbook may not tell you, you need to know. So in short, to summarize that, of course, you need to look at the top line, meaning your income, meaning the rental income. And the rental income is always a function of your space rented out times the rate per square meter. One needs to manage this and have a close eye on that. Secondly, on the expenses, one needs to check expenses like a hawk, and if something goes out of line, take action. As an example, a real example in our little organization, because we became bloated and many people were doing certain things, I delegated many of those checking the expenses to other people. Guess what? Since lockdown, I check every invoice myself. And if an invoice has line items on it that I don't agree with, questions are asked. And if it is a proverbial water under the bridge, i.e. a past expense that we're not paying, at the very least now we can stop that same expense recurring for the future, i.e. we stop that particular item from happening again. So that, and it sounds crazy to having to do that almost micromanagement of it. And that brings you to kind of a viewpoint one should have, almost like a squint look on it. On the one hand, you need to have your one eye on the big picture to grow to whatever your vision is, ideally very big, and keep a firm focus on that big picture or the long-term future at the same time, which I also forgot from time to time, but I need to relook at that, is the look on the micro thing, to look at every penny. You look after the pennies, the rands will look after themselves.
Based then on those lessons learned, what is it that Orion Real Estate is good at, that you can confidently say and bet the last 100 Rand in your pocket right now that is what you're good at?
We're good at many things, but one thing we're exceptionally good at is to do the fixer-upper thing. So there are fantastic construction companies out there. Many of them are in big trouble also. But in fairness to that whole construction industry, there's some really world-class companies that can put up world-class structures. And I think that the monuments in Sandton and elsewhere are testimony to that. They can do that. But taking a scrappy building in whatever area, like a abandoned, vandalized ex-supermarket in Delft, murder rate capital of South Africa, and making it pretty and modern, and doing that at a cost that is below what the market would charge. Typically, we could do what they call a tenant installation, meaning to prepare, let's say, office premises for a new tenant, carpets and drywalling and whatnot, for the tenant or a retail premises. We can do this in most cases at probably around half the cost of what a contractor would charge us, because we have in-house capability with our own technical crew. So we're very good at that. We also, I think, quite good at our relationship with our national retailers, particularly in terms of that relationship management. So if I mention two, those are the two things. Yeah, we're good at those, particularly doing more with less, knowing how to take a drywall panel and turning it around for the next tenant and fastening that against the frame, and now it becomes a new drywall, but it's a second-hand component. Once it's plastered and painted, nobody knows it's a second-hand panel. But also it helps with being environmentally conscious. Many people speak about being environmentally responsible and greening and all those wonderful things. And we put solar panels on the rooftop, and we want to use the wastewater and turn it into grey water and stuff like that. It's all wonderful projects, and they're quite costly, and they do add value. But what's quite often forgotten is managing the waste. Breaking down a wall, as an example, has as waste product bits of mortar and bits of brick. Now, if one were to clean those bricks, even the half bricks, you can reuse those on another wall. Two things now happened. You've created a job for a person, a laborer, to earn that is a meager income, but a meager income is better than no income, for him to clean those bricks at a certain price, and that'll be less than what new bricks will cost you. Secondly, you can now reuse those bricks, and they will carry zero carbon footprint, because the carbon footprint was used up the first time those bricks were manufactured. So you're doing two things. You're economically positive, but you're also environmentally positive, and we're good at that.
Franz, the nice thing about this conversation you and I are having is that we've got some very interesting questions coming through from the audience, and we'll get to them in a bit. But what I wanted to ask you is, I mean, when we started off the year, I think many CEOs, many institutional investors had their own assumptions about what they thought 2020 would bring. And the one thing I like that you do, and I had a look at what's happening on your website, is that you do the CEO letter at the start of the year every year, and you sort of set out what you want to do, and reflecting back on the previous year. Based on that then, and based on where we are right now, it's June 26th, to what extent have your assumptions changed as a result of what we're currently going through? I mean, nobody knows when normality will return, if there is any kind of normality. It might be a different normality right now, but how have you changed those assumptions? Do you have to write a new CEO letter?
Nastassia, absolutely true. My CEO letter is not valid, other than reflecting on the past. That's the only valid part. If you'd asked me in January, Franz, or what you're going to do this year, I would have told you whatever wonderful things we're going to be doing. And under normal circumstances, those would have been valid comments. Of course, they were not valid right now, given with hindsight. No one could have predicted the impact of COVID-19 from a health perspective and people perspective, and people dying. Let's not disregard that there are people who are going to die, and their families who will lose a loved one and a family member, and that is tragic in itself. However, and this is where the hard part comes in, and then I'll call on military terms. There's a military term that says collateral damage. And unless one makes peace with the collateral damage, you're not going to win the war. There's another one, which I quote sometimes when I speak with my own staff in our own staff meetings and discussions. I use the Titanic. We've all seen the movie. The Titanic is, of course, full of passengers having a good time, as per the movie. And then this thing starts sinking. People jump on a life raft. And let's take I'd like to take the participants also through a bit of a mind game over here. Think yourself into jumping off this boat, and you're lucky enough to actually jump onto a life raft, because some people fall into this ice cold water. And you're on a life raft with 30 people on board. You can't call them passengers because they're just on board. They're just bodies there. But the life raft was only designed for 20 people, and it's taking in water. In the next 5 or 10 minutes, this life raft will sink, and all 30 people will perish. How do you solve that conundrum? Because it is terrible. You've just jumped off a boat, you're now on a life raft, which says life raft, but now you're 30 versus 20 that it can take. And of course, the answer should be 10 people have to get off this life raft. Now, I can tell you that 10 people who have to get off are not going to choose to get off. They would like somebody else to get off. So now it becomes this dilemma. Who chooses who must leave the life raft? And who should be the survivors? Well, I can't answer that because one doesn't know. All we know is 10 have to get off. Now, at the end of it, 10 people will perish. That's a guarantee. They will die. And there's not even a guarantee that the remaining 20 will survive, but they have a chance of surviving. And this is where we are now. We're now in a situation, as South Africa is concerned, as much as we care, and we can cry for the people who will get sick and have a loved one who will pass away. But do we take care of or focus only on the 1,000, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000, maybe 20, maybe 50,000 people will die? Or do we consider the 57 million people of this country, of which many, many, many people right now, as we speak, go hungry? They do not have food to eat. How do we deal with that? Now we're back to the life raft. Who must get on, who must get off? And we have the same dilemma in our organization. If I now speak for the wider group outside of Orion Real Estate, we're in the hotel business. We have many workers there, and many of those are on what is called the minimum wage, which is on a good day not much money. And I don't try to make an excuse for minimum wage. It is what it is. But those industries cannot afford to pay more, otherwise they go bust, and then there's nothing for anyone to eat. So right now, many of those people have been put on temporary layoff, meaning no income. And those poor people have nothing to eat. So I took it on myself, I think that this week, last day or so, to take some of my personal money and give them each 500 Rand. Now I can tell you, you can spend 500 Rand in 2 seconds in a shop in Sandton, but now for a person who doesn't have food to eat, that's something. So the lessons learned from this year, no business plan, no forecast could have told us how it's going to be playing out. I couldn't have told you, and I'm not a fortune teller. So what we've had to deal with is beyond comprehension. And I feel sorry for any management team and CEO out there who has to make a dramatic decision that are way and above his religious convictions or philosophical convictions. But we have to do this. It is what it is.
All right, so let's cool. So let's get to the more exciting bits, and these are some of the questions that have come through. So the first question says, if I have 10 million Rand to invest in the company, what are my options?
Well, I suppose there are two options really. We're a real estate investment firm, and we could, the person could go into the market and purchase shares based on the market price, and as many as are available. Alternatively, the person can come to us, and we could issue new shares to this person, making him a substantial shareholder, and that would be a negotiated settlement, i.e., explaining to this potential investor what the value of the company is, and of course there's all the information available to determine the value, and issue those shares to this investor at a discount. Why? This is where we are. We're now in a world where discounts are appropriate, because I know what the company can do with the 10 million Rand. It can now go and exercise and execute on that investment strategy, purchasing properties that could be refurbed or redeveloped at good value and creating a yield from this. So that's the one way. Another way would be if the person wants more, call it a guaranteed income. We do have the authority to issue corporate bonds. The person could enter into purchasing a corporate bond, meaning financial loan papers, and lend the company money. That is available. So really, to recap, there's three possibilities, or a combination of the three: going to the market, purchase shares, come to us and do a deal where we issue new shares, or come to us and offer us some kind of loan facility or a corporate bond facility, which we can then entertain as well.
All right. The next question says, social housing opportunities. I think there should be opportunities there. What does Orion think about that, especially in the big cities?
Absolutely. And life is a strange place. As my first investment, the one at Elof and Marshall Street, kind of came to us in a fortuitous manner. I was very busy signing off audit files. Next thing, I was in the property business. So here comes social housing. A few weeks ago, we received an inquiry from some people in Nelspruit about social housing. The Nelspruit area has a need of 10,000 social housing units. We then started putting effort and work into this, and we recently submitted to social housing. We're busy with a major investment pack to social housing, where we want to develop 1,000 units at our Promenade Centre in Nelspruit, and 1,000 units at our Wendywood Shopping Centre in Sandton. So social housing is really designed by government to subsidize that housing and to create quality accommodation for people who need to get a leg up, if one can describe it like that. There are pitfalls in that the grant provided by government is only 272,000 Rand maximum per unit. And then attached to that is also almost a rent control thing where you're only allowed to charge a certain price per unit. The cheapest units are, I think, 658 Rand or something. So the challenge therein lies in creating or developing these units at a cost price that is, unfortunately or fortunately, well within what normal development costs would be, and then making do with the return that is limited by the formula in terms of how much rental one can collect. And now we've commissioned QS, a lady by the name of Terusha, and also an architect and our own team to work on it. Right now, it's a project on the go. We believe we can get this over the line. Emily at Social Housing is very, very excited about the project. I think she also wants a unit in Sandton at a good price. I'm sure we'll figure something out there. It is doable, but that's where the skills we learned over 30 years of doing more with less. Now this time around, they call it those bragging rights, or the claim we make about doing more with less. Here it will be tested, because the normal numbers, as in 15% professional fees, so much for land and services, and so much for the construction cost, is not going to work in this environment. So we need to figure out a way how to do it. Our advantage is that we own the land already. On the Wendywood side, that property is paid for. There's no debt on that. So we can be more creative in terms of developing social housing. And this will be a high-rise social, or medium-rise, probably 10 to 15 floors, and a lot of units per floor. And of course, it needs lifts and whatnot. But from on a personal level, I do not, and I repeat, not want to create a copy of East European social housing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Those ugly monstrosities of low-cost housing. You also find those outside of Paris, where these people are living there in kind of squalor conditions. No can do, will not do that. So we will need to figure out a way how to develop social housing on a high-rise level, but making the quality of the accommodation so that the person has a decent quality of living at an affordable way. Of course, that will go hand in hand with house rules and security and cleaning services, and also things like coffee shops and how does this whole entrance lobby look like and so forth. Those are all design features linked in with technical features. But for me, that's very exciting. I believe there's a future for that. I think it is doable. I think the country needs it. I think that the poor people who do not have quality accommodation, one can take care of. And of course, particularly Nelspruit, which is in the hub of the center, right next to transport, beautiful shops we have there. Nastassia, we've got a beautiful A&D split store there that can offer you some beautiful shoes at high prices, and with the customers there for that. So it's a wonderful, it will be great living, a quality of life opportunity, and same with Wendywood Sandton, with close proximity to the Sandton CBD precinct, saving all those transport costs from further afield and so forth. Yeah, this part of what makes my life exciting, and it's so we're not just sitting here looking at the rent roll and 1 month to the next. We're always working on what can be exciting, what can we do in addition to studying the rent roll.
The next question says, what's your experience being listed on the ZAR X versus the JSE?
That's a very, very good question. Having been on JSE 15 years, and JSE is what JSE does. And of course, some years back, they introduced Altex. There was another market as well to accommodate smaller companies. Truth be told, JSE, I don't think, is geared to deal with smaller companies. They apply the same rules and regulations for small companies to large companies. Unfortunately, from time to time, in their haste and in their excitement to beat up the small companies, they overlook the Steinhoffs of this world and the Tongarts of this world, and there are many more like that. So I can hold my head high and say in all my 15 years in the JSE, we never once had a qualified audit report. Did we have issues? Did we make mistakes? Should we have done things better? Absolutely. So ZAR X, yes, ZAR X is small. Yes, ZAR X is not well known. Yes, ZAR X is still needing many more retail investors who will trade on that platform. But I can tell you one thing for sure, and they have the same rules, but pretty much as JSE. It's not like there's all of a sudden the rules have gone out the window. We have to comply with those rules. But there's an open line of communication. I can speak with the executives at ZAR X, Graham, Etienne, and the guys directly. They uphold the rules, so there's no free ride. However, just a relationship in terms of communicating with them, understanding what needs to be achieved, I find that very exciting. So me, from a personal level, aside from the regulatory environment, I find dealing with ZAR X a lot more comfortable than dealing with JSE.
All right. The next one has to do with vacancy rates. And it says ACA Krantz building as of April 2020 was at 2,815 square meters. What percentage of that overall, and what vacancy rate does it become unsustainable for the business looking at COVID-19?
Yes, no, vacancy rate are, what shall one call it in the property industry? It's almost the cancer of property industry. You can have the most beautiful building, and the one behind me, that is the ACA Krantz building in Auckland Park. As you can see, it's a stunning building. Back in the 80s or 90s, when this thing was constructed originally for AXA, the French insurer, it was state of the art. It was probably the grandest building in all of Johannesburg before they built the fancier ones in Sandton. However, empty times rate is 0. So therefore, a vacant building is very, very painful for a property investor. As I said earlier, one of the investment criteria is you need to have cash flow going forward. The good news is that over the years, and we've owned this building now 20 years, over the years, by and large, we've had good occupancy rates. So the building's always managed to sustain itself, but the past few years, it had quite high vacancy rates. Our overall vacancy rate in our office portfolio is 45%, which is really very high. And that is our almost Achilles heel in our portfolio, our weak spot in our portfolio. But the good news is we're working as right now, we're working on a deal, a 2,500 square meter deal at the same building. And there's some other deals, inquiries coming through. We are hoping to have ACA in the current market, at least 85% let by the end of this calendar year. That, giving and looking at the inquiries and looking at what's happening, that is possible. So the ACA, and also the other good news on the ACA building, there's zero mortgage on that. It's debt free. So in an ordinary course, having a good income, we do have a call center there. We do have a Johannesburg Council, one of their regions in there. So there is income, but certainly the income can be a lot better by improving on the vacancies.
Franz, what do the post-lockdown opportunities look like for you right now as you look at the portfolio, the real estate portfolio?
Well, the post-lockdown, because the real estate company, we actually already post-lockdown. We are operating, and not all, but many of our tenants are paying their rent. Some of them are squeezing us for discounts or rent reductions, but we're moving past that. So the opportunities are actually multiples. One is we need to find a similar or even a larger company than Orion, and perhaps a listed company on the JSE or elsewhere, that may have issues with their balance sheet or issues with management. Our balance sheet is very lowly geared at around 15 to 20% on the value. So we could use the surplus equity in our balance sheet as equity for another merger. So I certainly am totally open, and we're actively pursuing merger activities and see what we can find. That's the one, certainly the post-COVID, and many funds they might not have spoken to us before COVID. I think post-COVID there certainly will be some interested parties to this end. What I've commissioned my CFO to do is, in fact, to provide me with a list of such target companies. I can't disclose that right now, but there is a list of names with market caps and share prices and whatever else, and who the shareholders are, that is on our target list, and we will start talking to some of those. That's the one thing. The other one is to doing what I've been wanting to do for 20 years or longer, is to purchase, I wouldn't say derelict, I mean, that's hard work, but to purchase secondary, used, smaller, meaning between 1,000 and 5,000 square meter industrial warehouses in a reasonable location. And one can purchase those even though they're vacant, doing what we know how to spruce up and make it look modern on a cost-efficient basis, and then either finding a tenant, alternatively selling that. Now it becomes interesting, because when we sell a property, as I alluded to earlier, we do not pay capital gains tax, and provided it's an investment property. So that's an opportunity. Then we of course spoke a little bit about social housing just now. Although we do not want to get into ordinary residential space, I think that space is too crowded. I think there's some headwinds in the residential space. We do not want to enter that area. But in terms of social housing, provided we get our numbers together in terms of costings and development cost and return on investment, provided we get those together, I think social housing for our company is certainly an opportunity.
All right, Franz, we've got about 2.5 minutes until we wrap. And earlier you were talking about, succession planning, and you want to be in your late 90s and still being able to see this company that you've built. What does succession planning look like right now for Orion? Is there somebody coming up the ranks that you have your eye on, who really can take this company even beyond what you are doing right now?
Yes. I don't want to mention names.
That's fine.
Because it might be called a commitment, but I do have people that I've identified who are either working with me or closely with me, or in terms of the company, to take the company forward. And that's also something I had to learn over the last couple of years, and particularly with having had time to do introspection during lockdown. It's time to think, and time to sometimes even attempt to this thing called meditation, which I'm not good at, but I try it from time to time. And to think, because there's a couple of truths that will hold true, with or without COVID. We will have one guarantee, and that is one day we will expire. I was going to say dead, but it's now, expire sounds like a better word. Which means one can accumulate whatever you can, become whatever gazillionaire. Ultimately, one leaves this earth as you came into it. And then for me, it's quite important, because what I do with what I've done from now until then, please God, then must be far away, but there is a then. So firstly, one has to have a bit of fun, and I have had a lot of fun, but maybe not enough. Is to really re-look and rekindle and re-understand the business. I love this business. It's a great business to be in. Part of my comfort is not sitting behind my computer typing emails, but actually being on site and going to the compactor area and the refuse area and seeing the not so pretty parts of the building and coming up with creative and innovative ideas how to do that better. So it's about succession. And I believe there are currently people, and there will be more people who can take over. Ultimately, it's not about ruling from the grave, certainly not. And it's not about ruling from a wheelchair or a chair. It's about letting a younger people and smarter people get on with the job, making it happen, and take the company to the next level. Because there's one, earlier we spoke about the ZAR X or listed in the structure. One of the which I forgot to mention early on is many individual or business people who are independent business people have a business model that's a one generational model where they run it, they make a lot of money, and at some point in time they have to then either sell it or close it. And I've seen this in my own life many times. I would like to create a situation that's multi-generational. Long after I've gone, and this company called Orion, and even if it's renamed something else, maybe it's called ABC, I don't know. But the company, as it was founded, needs to continue. And therein lies the opportunity for younger people than myself. And I'm sure there are a lot of smart people out there, and I'm sure there are a lot of really ambitious guys out there. It takes hard work. This is not an 8-to-5 job. This is guys who say, listen, I can do this thing 24/7. I have a passion for this thing called property. I love the bricks and mortar. I can interact with tenants comfortably and then take it from there. So there is succession planning.
All right, Franz, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you to all the participants and some of those questions that came through. Thank you to Decusatio and ZAR X for allowing us this opportunity to be able to engage even further. And I'm sure that we'll definitely have more of these sessions. And I do hope that the participants got to know you a little bit better. I know that I did, and your story is absolutely fascinating. And I can't wait to see all the exciting things that you have in store for your company and for the next person who is going to be taking over the reins and taking your vision forward. Franz, thank you so much for your time. And that's it from me.
And Nastassia, thank you very, very much for the kind words. And then also to yourself and all the participants, Dankeschön und auf Wiedersehen. And we'll talk again. Thank you very much.